So welcome, service learning students. Welcome, CSUMB students. We want to welcome you all to this tutoring training and workshop that is provided to you by Lauren and CLC. But before we get into that training, we also want to let you all know about upcoming deadlines for some of y'all that have already been registered. Thank you for registering on the due date of Friday, February 12th. We did get your responses, and you should already be included on the Canvas modules to complete those modules in order to move on to the next phase of being placed at a school district. Just want to let you all know that in order for you all to be placed at the school district, not only are you supposed to submit the registration, which you've already done, but you also have to complete your Canvas modules by Sunday, February 21st at midnight. So once you do complete your modules in Canvas, it'll allow our school district coordinators to see where we're going to place the students at, to send you an email around the next steps, which would be some of y'all would be doing a orientation for the school district. Others of you would just be getting information around completing a live scan. And once that happens, we're recommending students to get their live scans completed and submitted to the school districts by March 5th. Try to get your background checks cleared so that way you can go ahead and start on your MySLP process. So if you have any questions regarding any placements, school placement through the K through 12 opportunities, please contact me, Rene Casas. Emails rcasas, RCASAS at csumb.edu. And so, yeah, as mentioned, the hard deadlines, make sure that you submit it by the 21st of, complete your Canvas modules by the 21st of February. And so as noted, the Canvas course modules take up to 5 hours, where you do get a certificate of being a mandated reporter. That takes about 4 hours. So that's most of the chunk of time that you'll do for your Canvas course. And you will get a certificate, and the certificate you'll be able to keep with you and save. So that way, when you do go into not only the K through 12 school placement process that we do have for you for this semester, but just to keep for your records as well. And so with your background check, just make sure that you contact with your field coordinators when they send you an email. Live scan checks could take between 2 to 3 weeks. We're seeing a quick turnaround for students that are going into the district itself to get their fingerprints tested. Just make sure that you follow CDC guidelines of wearing your mask and practicing social distancing if you do decide to go into a school district to get your live scan. If you are going to be going outside of the school district at your home town, just Google live scan in your area, in your community, to see if you can go get your live scan completed. Again, follow CDC guidelines of wearing your masks, and also ensure you're practicing social distancing when you are going in to go get your live scan. Another thing to note is that we are covering students that are paying for live scans out of pocket. We do have a reimbursement application and a process for you to get reimbursed. It is all on our website, and it's also a link on this PowerPoint, SLI student live scan reimbursement. And then finally, once you do complete your live scan, the school district notifies you that you're ready to get placed. Either the coordinator contacts you or the district itself will contact you saying that you're ready to get placed. And they'll send either the coordinator or the school district will send you the host teacher's name and include you on an email around what time you'll be serving, who will be your site supervisor, and what school you're going to be tutoring for. And last but not least, you will have to register your site placement on My Service Learning Placement, MySLP. If you have any questions, you can also contact myself on this process, or you can contact your school coordinator that's going to be in communication with you via email around orientation or the live scan process. And once you go through all those steps, you are ready to begin your service. So complete a minimum of 20 hours. Make sure that you enter your hours on the time log that's provided to you on my service learning placement, my SLP. And remember, your students are counting on you. So please, please, please be on time, be prepared, show up with energy and your heart, and make a difference for our students. And just a reminder, at the end of your placement of your hours that you're conducting for your site, there is a student portion of the evaluation on MySLP. So when you click on your home screen on MySLP, you have other forms. That other form is an evaluation that you will send to your site supervisor. So you'll fill it out via electronically, and your site supervisor will get an email to provide feedback on evaluation of your service experience. So share your appreciations with your host teacher and your students. And I believe that is it.
Yeah, awesome.
And here is a 7-step process. Perfect.
Okay. Thanks, Renee.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions for Renee?
Yeah, I actually have one.
Mm-hmm.
So how long is it gonna take for me to get like placed in a school or like get like a message or something, because I'm still waiting on like something, so I don't know, like the live scanner of response back.
That's a really good question, Liberty. So did the field placement coordinator reach out to you regarding what school you're going to be placed in?
No, not yet.
Okay, so I'm gonna look through our database of what we have for the students that have filled out the information, and I can email you separately of who your field coordinator is and what district you're gonna be placed at. So I'll follow up with you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. But just for students that are that are listening to us that are not part of this session with us right now, just know that after you complete your Canvas course modules and you fill out the registration form of their school placement registration form of where you want to get placed within the schools, we get an email and we'll be placing you. So it usually takes between 3 to 5 days of you completing your Canvas course modules that we intentionally be looking out for students to be placing them with school districts. So let me look at our database, Liberty, and then I'll be emailing you shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I had a quick question. You said that we have access to the PowerPoint. Is it in our modules for the SL, the K through 12? Or
No, they're not on the Canvas modules, but I'm not sure. Lauren, would you?
I was
Is
just
this
wondering
request?
whether yeah. Oh. I
Yeah.
was just
Yeah,
wondering whether
I don't know. Seth just shared this with me. Would it be okay to just make it public and put it in the chat, Renee? Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we get started, since we're a small group, I thought it would be great just to hear a little bit about. We could maybe do a quick round of introductions, including Renee and Andrea, just to get to know each other since we're a small group. My name's Lauren. I'm the director of tutoring, and I work at the Cooperative Learning Center. I'm going to talk to you today about some basics, including the tutoring cycle, and then we're going to do an activity to kind of brainstorm some steps, or not really steps, but some activities or basic things that you should include when you're working with students. So I'll try to make this as useful to you all as possible. If you know it seems like some of you know where you're going to be going potentially, and who all your students are, who you'll be working with. So we can talk a little bit about that. And I will pass it to Julia to introduce yourself. So just your name. I use she, her pronouns. So your name, what you prefer to be called pronoun wise, and then talk a little bit about your placement and where you're at with the service learning process. Thanks.
Okay. So my name is Julia. Can you guys hear me? Because my internet is unstable. Okay, perfect.
We can hear you.
My pronouns are she, her, and then I got placed in El Suasal Middle School, and I will be working in I believe the English department. It's an ADL class, so I'm not sure what that signifies yet, but I did receive an email, and I need to do the background check, and I've already finished all of my modules.
Renee, do you want to go next since you're on my screen?
Yeah. So my name is Rene Casas. I'm the Community Partnerships and Evaluation Specialist for the Service Learning Institute. I'm also the coordinator for the school districts of Monterey Palencia Unified School District and Salina City Elementary School District. Pronouns he, him, his.
Liberty.
My pronouns are she, her, and I mean, I still haven't gotten placed yet, so I don't know about that.
Liberty, what are you studying at CSUMB? Tell us just something about you.
I'm majoring in psychology. It's my first year here at CSUMB as a transfer student from Hartnell.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Andrew, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Monroe. I'm the Associate Director at Service Learning, and you might see me during student drop-in hours. And just here, I work with Renee and our student assistants to just help with the placement process, finding partners and all that kind of stuff. So welcome, and glad you are here to participate.
Thanks, everybody. And yeah, welcome. I'm really glad that you all are here. Even though we're a small group, I hope that this is useful to you all. So for today, I'm gonna change the structure a little bit, so we'll be a little bit more ad hoc with this. But we're gonna talk about what you're hoping to learn and kind of focus on a goal for today. We'll do a little reflection warm up about a learning experience that you've had and kind of tap into you as a learner and talk a little bit about why that's important to working with other students in their learning. And then we'll get to the nitty gritty talking about the tutor cycle. Again, this isn't something depending on your placement and the age group that you're working with, some of these things might need to be tailored and tweaked. And we talked a lot about that in the workshop on Monday, which was recorded. So if you're here in person or on Zoom or you're watching this recorded, you should be able to access the first part of this workshop from Monday, where we talked about really what the role of a tutor is, what are some things that tutors do, and why is it different from a teacher, and how do you tutor youth compared to tutoring like an adult or a college student learner. So for sure, check out Monday's workshop. So we can maybe just talk about this. So Julia and Liberty, just thinking a little bit about something that brought you here today. So something that you wanted to understand. I think probably for Liberty, she had a goal of trying to figure out her placement or maybe get more info about that. But I'm really asking about the tutoring aspect or the working with other students. So maybe each of you could just say a little bit about something you'd like to hear about from me or what you'd like to learn about from the group. That would be great.
So we're talking about our goal for today. Yeah, okay. Well, my business 300S professor encouraged us to come here if we were going through the K through 12. So I didn't have like any particular questions. I just thought, why not join or like learn more about tutoring, especially middle schoolers, because it's kind of like there's an age difference, right? So that's kind of like maybe I'm used to teaching other people my age one way, but just kind of like, how do you teach someone at a certain level when you're like at a different level than them, if that makes sense? So my goal today is kind of to learn how to do that or overcome that.
Great. Thank you, Julia. Makes sense. Liberty, do you want to add anything about what brought you here?
The same thing too, but also because I have a little brother. So, like I want to help him out because he's always like not paying attention when I see him on Zoom with the teacher. So, and then he's always like, not participating. And I just like want to get him on track and be like, well, I have experience in this because, I already help little kids like you. So I can help you out too. You don't have to necessarily go to the school and get like tutoring because I'm here to help you too.
Great.
So, yeah.
Yeah, what are some of the, just to talk about that a little bit, right? Because with COVID, we're dealing with a lot of siblings at home or children at home learning on the computer. Why do we feel like it's hard for them, youth learners, to focus on the computer? Like Liberty, your little brother, or like other examples, like what are some reasons why that would be difficult for a young person?
I feel like because they get distracted so easily. Like he's always
sure.
on his like phone or like doing something else, and I'm like, how do you like stop that? Like, how do you make him pay attention? Like how do you get him like interacted with like the students and make him want to talk to the teacher too? So, yeah.
Yep. Julia, anything to add?
Oh, I assume like the similar distractions that I have when I'm in class, right? It's like I get up to get coffee, or my dog's right here and, I want to give it some attention. And it's different when you're at home to be, self-disciplined enough to get yourself focused to do the work. So I assume the same distractions we have is the same that they have, or similar.
And I just want to add, for Julia and Liberty, thank you all for joining this. It's always good to get more tools, to see what you can learn and adapt and apply for the profession that you want to follow. And even for myself, I'll speak for myself. These sessions are good to make me understand like what I can incorporate into some of the things that I do in my work. So as you get more professional, as you get more into the field, you're always going to be seeking areas of where you can go to seek further career development and tools to help you out in your career. So just want to thank both of you for coming on and participating.
Yeah, so I totally back up Renee, and it's also really good that you both are thinking about some of the reasons why youth might be distracted in this environment, right? And I keep saying youth, but what Julia talked about, just her own distractions or her own tendency to check her phone or pet the dog or whatever. Just think about, a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, right, on a screen. And something we talked about on Monday was just the fact that younger students are really adult directed, and adults tend to be more self-directed, right? So I have the ability to say, wow, I really wasn't disciplined today, to use Julia's word. I got up for coffee like 5 times. I was playing words with friends, right? We can kind of recognize those things and self-correct. And so I feel that that's something with our younger students, is we really need to think about this new learning environment we're in and how they might respond the way that, Liberty's brother is responding, which is totally normal and justified. So thank you both for your thoughts. So I'm just going to have this be a quiet writing activity for a few minutes. And you can do this on paper. You can bring up a Google Doc on your computer. I'm not going to look at it. This is just for you to reflect for a few minutes. And I'd like you to think about a time. It can be in school when you were little or younger, or something from school now, when you learned something new. And I want you to think about what made learning that comfortable for you. So what helped you feel comfortable or safe in that situation? And did you learn that thing? Like, what made the learning happen? And instead of focusing on the thing that you learned, whether it was ukulele or algebra or whatever, try to focus on the context for learning. So like, what were the things that made learning positive for you in that situation? And so again, we're just going to write for a few minutes. So I'll give about 4 to 5 minutes for this. So you can write on this, and then we'll come back together and we'll talk about why this is relevant to what you all are doing. Okay. Liberty, do you mind sharing something quickly from, or something, not quickly, like hurry up, share something, just a little abbreviation of what you wrote about?
I wrote about math, a class in math. What made me like learn was I don't know, I guess like the teacher's like, it's okay if you don't understand or if you don't get it, like you would just go over it, and that just like, you know, would make me feel better because I felt like, oh, I'm never gonna get the hang of this, and I'm not gonna be able to do it, and other people are smarter than me. But like him just like reemphasizing like, no, you could do it. That made me more comfortable in learning. So yeah.
And Liberty, was this at Hartnell or CSUMB or way back when you were little?
No, it was in Hartnell, a stats class.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm putting like all the stuff in the calculator. That was super hard for me, but like him like yeah, but him like, you know, going over it, and yeah.
And this was back in the before times when we were all together in person on campus?
Yes, sadly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing. Julia, anything to share from your writing?
I guess something positive or that helped with my learning experience was always like people who ask questions, kind of making you feel comfortable to ask questions too during class, even through Zoom. Sometimes it's kind of like intimidating or uncomfortable depending on the teacher, right? So sometimes like when someone asks a question, it makes you more confident to ask questions too, if that makes sense. So that's a positive learning experience that I've had.
Awesome. So I hear a little bit from both of you about the safety to be wrong or the safety to kind of try things. And then Julia talked a little bit about, which is great, about articulating your own questions, which is something that a tutor that's definitely in the purview or in the zone of what a tutor should be helping with, right? Is how can I help the student ask their own questions so that when they're by themselves, they've started to develop the critical thinking. So that's great. So why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about the things that made the learning happen or the things stick with you versus like the actual thing that you learned? Like, why do you think this is important?
I think when you have positive learning experience, it's like it's kind of ingrained, it stays with you, and like you use those experiences to later on, right? It's not just like I think Renee was saying earlier, it helps you through like your career, and like these are things not just for like, you can use these tools anywhere. It's not just tutoring, right? So I think that's why it helps, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's applicable to other situations, right? Besides the service learning or besides the tutoring experience. The other thing that's important about this is that this is just learning. We're talking a lot about tutoring or learning in our kind of institutional context. So at Hartnell, at CSUMB, in a tutoring session, but learning happens all the time, right? And learning happens in places that aren't necessarily ideal, like Andrea's comment about, I think, a cousin or nephew who's not having a great time with online learning. And so I find this kind of the conditions for learning to be a really, really important thing for tutors, for students who are working with other students, whether they're youth or their peers at CCMB, like the CLC tutors, because the conditions for learning tend to be the thing that influence learning more than the actual teaching part, if that makes sense. And I think that we've kind of highlighted that a few times today, like Liberty talking about her brother being distracted, right? It's not the way the teacher is teaching, but it's the conditions for learning. And so thinking about what that environment is that you're setting up with your students is really, really important. Just to reference back to Monday's workshop, we talked a lot about how tutors or even beginning teachers, and I would say this about myself when I was starting to teach, thinking that the chit chat or the kind of getting to know students is like not a good use of time, right? And that's actually a really good use of time, especially for you all supporting these students virtually. Getting to know them and allowing them to connect with one another is one of the most important roles that you have. And so just thinking again about that safety environment that place where they can feel okay to ask questions, and the place where they go where they know the people who they're working with, right? They know people's names and they know a little bit about them. That can create really good opportunities for learning. So that's my kind of summary about this. Other thoughts or comments on this writing, things that came up for you before we move on?
I guess just as I was listening to you, Lauren, I guess I wanted to say, as I'm like getting introduced to what's going on with my young cousins, is that what you just said about the importance of getting to know students, it is really important, because in talking to an 8-year-old and 10-year-old, they've completely internalized, and they just flat out say, oh, this teacher doesn't like me, this teacher hates me, this teacher. And so you as a tutor are often then like the next line that they'll meet, and anything you can do to, I guess, develop a more positive relationship than what they're having sometimes with their teachers is really, really critical. And if they are also of color, I think it's an added thing, because my cousin is African American, and I'm hearing also stories from friends who are Latina and have little boys, and these kids are going to get labeled, and that label sticks with them. And so, and for them to be labeled over acting out on Zoom is just breaking my heart, because I'm like, this is where it starts. So.
Yeah, and I did not chat back. What I was thinking, Andrea, was just the amount of research about discipline with students of color anyways, and then you add this layer of on Zoom, and so it's just like this compounding situation, and I completely understand and know that it's problematic. And I 100%, I back up what you're saying, that for sure. A great point that the tutor is kind of the second line of, well, I'm having a hard time, but then I've got this like near peer often who can kind of help me. And I look up to this person because they're like me. So that is a really, really good point, and an important role that tutors play. So thank you for that. Okay. So I'm actually going to put you both into a breakout room together. As awkward as that may be, one of the things that's really nice about working as a tutor is that you get to find ways for your students to work together, right? And sometimes that might be without you kind of there for that. I think that you all will need to work with your teacher and figuring out the placement and what you all are doing and the age of your students to figure out whether that's appropriate. But something that we find at CLC is really allowing people to talk together without kind of the direction of the tutor is an important part of the learning process. And so Julia and Liberty, I'm going to put you all in a room so you can just kind of talk together and generate some ideas without the other folks in the room. And then we'll come back together and talk about it. So this is I'll set this up by saying that these are kind of the general verbs or the ways that a lot of the tutoring literature describes the tutor cycle. And it's listed as a 1 through 6, but I just want to say that I should have, like last time we did this, I think I said, I need to put a graphic on here instead of the list, because it's not really linear. And I just want to make that point, is that the tutor cycle was, I think, coined in the 90s as this kind of like thing that you go through as a tutor, this process that you follow to work with students on the course content or whatever skill that they're learning. But it is a non-linear process. So even though the cycle says you start with welcoming, then you identify, then you prioritize, you might be kind of vacillating or going back and forth between, you finish your welcome, but then you identify and prioritize maybe over and over again, back and forth for, 20 or 30 minutes. And so just thinking about that as you all generate some questions and some ideas together, is that it's not lockstep, except for maybe the welcome, right? We've got to have a welcome at the beginning. It has to be pretty intentional, and it has to have an opportunity for students to identify themselves in some way and tell you who they are, right? The way that I did with you all, where I really do want to know what you want me to call you. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and then And slowly that will build over time the more and more we meet together, if we were a tutoring session and we were going to meet again. So I'm going to I have a Google Doc, and I will put that in the chat, and then I'll make a breakout room. And basically, I've got the prompt on there for you. Just generating some questions, like questions you have about that stage in the cycle. If you don't know what it means to prioritize, like, what do you think it means? What do you think you would do at that point with your students? And kind of thinking through some just really easy brainstorming together, no right or wrong answers, and then we'll talk about it together. So there's the doc in the chat, and then I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. Or room. Okay. So you all will have about, we'll say 7 minutes, and then I'll bring you back. So how did it go? I'm looking at the Google Doc, and you mostly had conversations and then maybe took some personal notes. Okay, let's just quickly debrief, and then I will talk a little bit about some basics, like a working cycle that you all can take with you, and then some more like considerations for working with students, and then we'll open it up for questions. So Julia and Liberty, I'll turn it over to you.
So I wasn't sure of whether to write our comments in the Google Docs, but we wrote them down on a piece of paper. So for welcome, we put introduction and questions. And then I don't know if you want to take the next one, Liberty, for identity.
For identity, we put, I don't know, related to us, like identify ourselves and who we are.
Yeah, and then along with that, we were just saying maybe identify with the student. Like, I know when I was younger, teachers used to say, when I was in middle school or when I was in high school, kind of like identifying with students that way, maybe. And then prioritizing maybe like the teacher's goals for the day, or maybe prioritizing the students who need extra help. And then Liberty, do you want to do apply?
And then apply is like applying our knowledge from what we know and how we could apply it for the students' work and relate it to them and help them out in that sense.
And then confirm, we put feedback just from like the students to see if they understood the material or if they didn't, or things like that.
And then for independence, we put like if they understand the material so they could be independent and work on themselves or well with themselves.
Perfect. Sorry, I'm just typing. Yeah, so this is these are really good pieces for brainstorming. In terms of the verbs that I gave you, and I intentionally, they're pretty vague. So I think what you all talked about is pretty right on. In terms of the only one that I would clear up, definitely, I think identifying yourselves and having the students identify themselves, I think that would be more of the welcome. And I think you all talked about that in terms of an icebreaker, like getting to know one another. But identify the tasks for the day. And it's kind of associated to the prioritizing. Like I think Julia mentioned getting the goals for the day from either the teacher or goals that you're setting. So identify is kind of the step before that, right? So it's what are we going to work on today is kind of the big question in the tutoring world, or the big question that we kind of pose for we give to new tutors as a way to kick off their session. So what are we going to work on today? And that is a really big question for young students, right? Like they might need a little bit more direction on what is actually going to be worked on and not opening it up so much. So that question might need to be, oh, thanks, Renee. Have a good one.
Oh, it's already 1 o'clock. Oh my goodness. I have to go too. I'm so sorry.
Bye, Andrea. Have a good one.
Okay, bye-bye.
So doing a little bit of work to figure out what the agenda is going to be. So that's another good term that goes with the identify stage. And then prioritizing, right? It's that idea of what's going to be first, what's going to be second, what's going to be third. And that could be, like Julia mentioned, that could be getting students into groups based on what they need help with, and kind of prioritizing who you're gonna ask first, whose breakout room you're gonna go into first, right? That kind of thing. That's prioritizing. The application of knowledge, I really liked what Liberty said about the tutor kind of thinking like, what can we help the students apply, or like, what do we know that they can apply? The way that I like to think of apply is that's where the active learning is happening. And so what were the things that you were going to work on? Then once you get to apply, what are the activities that you're using to get students to work together? And it's less about the tutor to student interaction and more about the student to student interaction in the apply phase. So, and that can be a little bit more difficult for tutors to understand, and even some younger teachers, because it looks less like what we think of teaching, right? Teaching is what I'm doing right now. I'm talking at you, I'm telling you what it is. That's teaching in some ways that we think about it. But really, in the apply stage of a tutoring session, you're really having students work together and kind of co-create that knowledge. So just some ideas in terms of collaboration. So I'll make sure that's active learning and collaboration. Benjamin, thanks for joining. Do you want to add anything to what we were talking about before we move on?
Well, what were you talking about?
We were just talking
I
about.
kind of slept through the first hour.
We're just talking about the tutor cycle. We talked about applying knowledge, and then confirmation of knowledge, and then the last stage is fostering independence. So the fostering independence, I think, Liberty, what you mentioned about what you mentioned about working on their own, that could work at the end of the session. And that could also work in what I was just saying about the apply stage, right? So they're working together, or maybe they are doing some independent work in the middle, or with a partner or something like that. And then for the foster independence, what are they going to do after the session, right? So what are they going to work on their own? Do they have homework? Do they have a reading log or something that they need to do? So it's getting them to understand what that next stage is in the learning. What is the next step? Again, with younger kids, you might need to be more prescriptive. With CLC tutors, and when we're talking to students who are like you all, we don't really need to say, okay, Julia, your reading log is due tomorrow. So after the session, right, we're like, okay, get out the syllabus. What's coming up next? Let's talk about what you need to be studying. So it's a little bit different depending on the age. Okay. So what is a really practical kind of, if you were going to take that away, and I gave kind of a mini presentation on the tutor cycle based on what you all brainstormed, what would the working version of this look like? So this is something that you can take away from today that is probably easier to remember than the 6 or 7 steps that we looked at. So regardless of age, regardless of we might even use a structure for a meeting or a one-on-one session or a group session. It's not really dependent on the size of the group or the age or anything like that. This is kind of a working version of what we just talked about. So you're going to set the goal or the agenda, or your site is going to have a structure that's already provided for you. So you can say, okay, We're the Reading Buddies program. Today we're working on reading chapter 4, or we read chapter 4 for homework, and now we're going to talk about it. The activities go in the middle. For folks who are working in elementary school or middle school, the key is going to be short and lots of activities. So maybe 3 or 4 different activities, thinking that you might be working for an hour or so with students. You want to keep it quick, and you want to keep them different. So maybe you're working on writing for one activity, and then for another one, you're brainstorming on a whiteboard or doing something with pictures. So kind of thinking about what ways can you mix up the learning modality or the mode of learning. And then at the end, you're going to wrap up. That's all it is. You're going to either talk about what you did and then give the next step, or you're going to have the students talk about, so what do you think we did today? What do you think you learned from this session? Or again, if your students are a little bit younger, that might be too much. So you might want to say, write down a word that you learned today from your Reading Buddy session that you remember. So again, really focusing on what's appropriate for the age and what's going to work best for the number of students and things like that. But in general, this is going to be a good outline for you all. Any comments or questions about this?
It seems pretty straightforward, I think.
Yeah, so lots of repetition. Thanks, Julia. Lots of repetition based on what you all already brainstormed in terms of what you should be doing with students, like asking them if they're understanding during the activities, telling them, okay, we're done for today. What did you learn? So lots of overlap. So these points, they speak to something actually in Andrea's example of her nephew kind of getting away from the computer and not having enough of an attention span and kind of being unfocused, and some of the things that Liberty had talked about. So again, we want to keep students' attention. We want to keep the transitions pretty quick and make sure that we're doing short bursts of activity instead of one long activity that's going to take up an hour. For little minds, for little brains, that might be too much to focus on. So chunking out activities in 5 or 10 minute blocks is really, really helpful. You might need to also have repetition, right? So refocusing the group because their attention span might not be the greatest, especially on the computer. You might need to refocus and let them know, like, okay, remember, this is what we're working on, but we only have 3 minutes left. When you see me put up a blue screen on my computer, if you look at the blue screen, if you see a blue screen, that means that our activity is over. So keep checking your computer and make sure that there's no blue screen, or, you know, ways to keep them focused on the task is really, really helpful. Again, I'll just repeat it because it's about repetition, but it's really okay to say things in different ways or present things in different modes. So I gave you all verbal instructions on the Google Doc, and then I also had it on the Google Doc, and then I also had it on a slide. For younger kids, we might have pictures, we might have a whiteboard, we might represent things differently, but it's okay to repeat, and it's actually how people learn is through repetition. So it's important to just remember that younger kids especially, they need that, and it might take a couple times for them to understand something, and that might mean a couple times over a couple times of meeting with them, right? So a few tutoring sessions for a concept or something to really solidify, and that's perfectly normal. The last 2 notes we already talked about. Oh, Benjamin, you want to say something?
I'm just dwelling on some of my own, thinking about that repetition and realizing I think repetition is why I don't like watching videos in class, because it always seems to just be redundant and more boring than anything else, because it's just the same thing.
Yeah, and depending on your learning style, it might not be the best to be watching a video about something. When you just watched a lecture about something, it might feel like more of the same because
Yep.
the mode is all on the computer, right? So it can feel a little repetitious in a bad way, I guess. Something that to think about is it's called interleaving, but it really means you teach something or you talk about something and then you wait a certain amount of time to bring it up again and then see what the recall is from students. And that's more of a teaching tool and less of a tutoring tool. But it might be, you might see a teacher using that in class is like bringing up something and teaching and then returning to it like a week or so later and kind of seeing what the students remember and then building on it. So your job as a tutor is to support that, right? So if teacher brings up some concept from a reading, then you're gonna want to, oh, that's something in my tutoring session I'm probably gonna want to talk about because it was important to the class. So just a couple thoughts there. The way that I've modeled some of the activities today, there were some examples for how you can, not too much because we were a small group, but I mentioned breaking students out into groups so they can work on their own independently. I gave you all time to write on your own and kind of told you, okay, I'm going to give you 7 minutes. I'll be back. So things like that and thinking about the facilitation for the online environment is going to be really important to your tutoring or your work with students. And then the connections they make. We talked a lot about this on Monday, but how students connect with other students in their sessions and in their class is really important, especially right now. We want to make sure that they're able to talk to their peers, socialize a little bit. And I mentioned that that's really needed. So in any way that you can build that into your sessions at the beginning. And then if you're doing collaborative activities between students, that kind of socialness is already built in, right? So I put Julia and Liberty in a room. I didn't go in there and you all had to talk and get to know each other to a certain extent on your own. And so the more that you can think about the way that students are talking to other students in your sessions, the more the connection building or the community building is going to be a part of that. So those are just some overall things. Again, some repetition from what we talked about at the Monday workshop, but I'm repeating it because it's important. Any follow-up comments? Or I guess at this point, I just want to open it up. If any of you have burning questions or things that you absolutely need to know about working with students, we do have 15 minutes. So I'm just going to open up to questions or comments from you all. And then if we don't have any questions or once we're done, I can talk about how you can interface with the CLC so that if you want to talk to a tutor and get tips or get help, I'll talk about what's available to you. So I am opening it up to you all.
Okay, so say your availability changes, who would you have to talk to for that to like rearrange your hours?
I would probably email Renee. Since I'm not part of service learning, I think that's probably the best bet and Liberty, he was already helping you looking up your situation. So that's probably a good idea.
Okay.
Or maybe your site supervisor also.
Okay, thank you.
Either way. The site supervisor might be a little better though, since they're probably they're at the site and you might have already mentioned before you started to them what your schedule was.
I think Liberty.
Though if Renee is your site supervisor, then that's fine. But
Julia, did you have a question?
Yes, I had a question. It's been a while since I've tutored middle schoolers. I did like an ESL program in high school, and I was just wondering, I don't know what age range I'm getting, right? But you mentioned a couple of things. You said breakout rooms individually. Would you recommend that for like middle schoolers at that like age range, like breakout rooms individually? And then you mentioned something about like quick activities, I guess you were saying, like short, quick activities.
Yeah, I think a breakout rooms would work well for pair work or for groups of like 3 or 4. But I don't know that you all are going to have that big of a group where you can have like, you know, like the CLC tutors might have 2 breakout rooms with 3 people each in them. But even to have students work independently, kind of away from you, can be helpful because even though you're not the teacher, you're still an authority figure in a way. So that could be useful. And again, I would say talk to your teacher and follow all the service learning like guidelines in terms of how students can. I think you can't be alone with the student, but if the teacher is there, then that's fine. So just make sure to follow those kind of protocols. The other good one for middle schoolers, I would say, and definitely high school, would be Jamboard or any of the Google, like the tools for Google Drawing. But Jamboard in particular is,
What's that?
have any of you used Jamboard?
Never heard of it.
Okay, so Julia knows what it is. So, and I can actually show an example of one, but it's a sticky note tool that allows people to brainstorm. So I think it would be helpful if you were doing something like, you know, what do you remember from the reading? And you could make one of these and students could, you know, put ideas of what they remember. And it's, in a sense, it's a little bit anonymous because they're not writing their own paper about it or putting it in the chat and attaching it to their name. They're just putting it on a brainstorming board. So this is what I made for work, but this is an example. And it's got sticky notes and cool stuff that you can do with it. So that could be another tool. And just anything free. If you just Google free online learning tools, you'll get a bunch of stuff, and you'll probably be able to see some age. And Service Learning had some resources compiled with that kind of thing too. But anything to make it interactive, Julia, I would say is the key, so that it's not what I'm doing right now where I'm talking for a very long time at you. It would be the students interacting with something.
That reminds me of the annotation thing on Zoom.
Yeah, that's another good example. Yep. Or the whiteboard on Zoom. It's not great, but it exists. And those are,
I've only seen those used once, annotation and whiteboard. Once during a club.
Jamboard and the annotation on Zoom are probably the two that the CLC tutors use the most. They also quite often will just create like a Google Doc the way that I did, and then get people to work collaboratively on it because it's easy. You just need to know how to type. So again, depending on age, one might be better than the other. But these two are relatively good because for Google, it's relatively, everyone should have access. And some of the other fancier tools don't necessarily allow certain computers or tablets to access them. So it's something to think about. Other questions? Okay, so you'll probably have questions, and I would really love for you to reach out to me. The best way to contact me is to email the CLC email. And if you could put service learning in the subject line, that would be great. And then we'll make sure it gets to me or even another staff. So many of the staff have subject area expertise. So Julia Nanda, she's the writing coordinator, and she works with like the writing tutors and on research and reading and English language learning students. Carolyn is the ELL coordinator, so she works with English language learners. Julie is the math coordinator. So there might be someone on staff who could answer your particular kind of disciplinary expertise that we can connect you with. I myself I'm an English writing person. And then, I've talked a lot about the tutoring kind of learning theory stuff with you all today, but we're happy to help. Also, we can connect you with a tutor to actually talk to a CLC person about what it's like to be a tutor and what are kind of some tips that you've learned. And a lot of our tutors have experience tutoring youth whether it's like family members or they have another job and they're tutoring their young neighbor or whatever. So they'll have tips to share. So you can email us to set that up. You can also set it up yourself if you just you can make an appointment, or you can go to CLC's Canvas page and you can just drop in to talk to somebody. And you can just tell them, I'm a service learner. I want to talk to a tutor because I'm going to be tutoring math. Is there a math tutor here who I can talk to? Lauren told me that I could come, and we'll get you connected. And if you want to tutor, if you want to be a tutor at CLC, we're still hiring. We'll be hiring for summer and then also for fall tutoring. So if you have a real interest in doing this and you're like stoked on everything I'm saying and you're like, yeah, I really like this, and you go to your service site and you really love it, you might be a good fit for CLC. So just keep that in mind. We hire for the fall around April. So you'll see things that go out to all students about tutor information sessions for future employees. And that's another good way to get involved with tutoring and learning. So yeah, that's all I have. And I can stick around for a few minutes if there are more individual questions, but I super appreciate your time. And the recording and the slides will be made available to the service learning 300 plus people who got the invitation. So watch out for that.